A single nation in Europe would carve its name across every corner of the planet. From the frozen forests of Canada to the burning sands of the Sahara, from the rice fields of Indochina to the volcanic islands of the Caribbean, France built the second largest empire in human history. But how did a kingdom torn apart by religious wars, peasant revolts, and royal excess rise to dominate 5 continents? And how did an empire that once held a quarter of Africa, the jewel of Southeast Asia, and the most profitable colony in the world, eventually watch it all slip away? We must start from the beginning. Long before France was France, the land was known as Gaul, a vast Celtic territory stretching from the Rhine to the Atlantic, home to fierce warrior tribes who organized around powerful chieftains and resisted foreign domination with everything they had. But resistance requires unity, and unity was something the tribes of Gaul consistently failed to find. That weakness would cost them everything. In 58 BC, Julius Caesar marched north with 8 Roman legions and a personal ambition that had no ceiling. What followed was 8 years of relentless warfare. The Gauls came closest to victory under Vercingetorix, a young chieftain who finally united the tribes into a single coalition. He burned his own villages to starve the Roman legions. He handed Caesar one of his few defeats at Gergovia. But Caesar adapted, pursued Vercingetorix to the hilltop fortress of Alesia, and built 2 walls simultaneously. One to trap the Gauls inside, one to hold off the relief army attacking from outside. When the relief army broke, Vercingetorix rode out alone and laid his weapons at Caesar's feet. Gaul was Rome's, and from that moment, the land that would become France was fundamentally changed. Latin replaced Celtic tongues. Roman roads connected cities that had never spoken to one another. Over generations, the people stopped calling themselves Gauls and started calling themselves Romans. The first great transformation of this land was complete. Centuries of Roman rule gave way to Germanic invasion. The Franks, pushing in from beyond the Rhine, filled the vacuum left by Rome's collapse. Their king Clovis converted to Christianity in 496 AD, gaining the blessing of the church, the loyalty of the population, and a legitimacy that pure military force could never provide. For the first time, something resembling a French state began to take shape. The land of the Franks, Francia, France. His grandson's grandson would take that foundation and build something no one had seen since Rome itself. Charlemagne. Through 40 years of relentless campaigning, he extended the Frankish kingdom from the Atlantic to modern Hungary, from the North Sea to central Italy. On Christmas Day in 800 AD, Pope Leo III placed a crown on his head in St. Peter's Basilica and declared him Emperor of the Romans. But Charlemagne understood something many rulers miss, that conquest without culture is merely occupation. He standardized currency, established schools, promoted literacy, and patronized the arts. He was building something meant to last. His descendants split the empire in 843 AD. The western portion became West Francia. West Francia became France. The seeds had been planted. The centuries that followed were ones of invasion, plague, and survival. The Black Death killed nearly half the French population. The 100 Years' War brought English armies to the gates of Paris. By 1420, the English king had been declared heir to the French throne. France, as an independent kingdom, was on the verge of ceasing to exist. And then, a teenage peasant girl from Lorraine arrived and changed everything. Joan of Arc had no military training and no political connections. She had visions from God and an absolute conviction that drove hardened soldiers to follow her into battle. She lifted the siege of Orleans. She escorted the Dauphin to Reims for his coronation. She turned the entire tide of a war that seemed lost. The English captured and burned her at 19 years old, but she had already done what she came to do. She had given France something it lacked for a generation: belief. By 1453, the English were gone. France had survived, and in surviving, France had found itself. The discovery of the Americas in 1492 opened a world of colonial opportunity. Spain and Portugal moved first, building empires of gold and spice, while France was consumed by its Italian wars and then its catastrophic wars of religion. 8 wars in 36 years, including the St. Bartholomew's Day Massacre of 1572, where between 5 and 30,000 French Protestants were killed in a matter of days. The streets of Paris ran with blood, and France fell further behind in the colonial race. The religious wars only ended when Henry IV converted to Catholicism, took the throne, and issued the Edict of Nantes, granting Protestants substantial rights. France could finally breathe, and almost immediately it began looking outward. In 1608, the explorer Samuel de Champlain founded Quebec on the banks of the St. Lawrence River. Unlike previous explorers, Champlain forged genuine alliances with indigenous peoples, learned their languages, and built a network of relationships that gave New France its foundation. The French Empire in North America was born. And back in Europe, Cardinal Richelieu was laying the political and military groundwork for French greatness. By the time Louis XIV came to power, France was already the most powerful nation on the continent. Louis XIV, the Sun King, built Versailles as a monument to royal magnificence and political control simultaneously. He required great nobles to attend his court, trapping them in gilded competition for royal favor, rather than leaving them free to plot rebellion in their own territories. He fought almost continuous wars across Europe. He built the French colonial empire deeper into North America, establishing the territory of Louisiana along the entire Mississippi River basin. In the Caribbean, the colony of Saint-Domingue became the most profitable piece of territory in the entire world, producing more sugar and coffee than any comparable territory on Earth, but doing so on the backs of nearly 500,000 enslaved Africans living in conditions of unimaginable brutality. It was a powder keg. Everyone could see it. No one wanted to think about what would happen when it exploded. The 7 Years' War shattered French colonial power. France lost Canada. France lost its influence in India. The Treaty of Paris in 1763 left France diminished, humiliated, and burning for revenge. When the American colonies revolted against Britain, France saw its opportunity. French money, French ships, and French soldiers helped Washington win at Yorktown. France had helped create the United States, and in doing so, had scattered the seeds of liberty, equality, and popular sovereignty across the Atlantic and back into France itself. Those ideas met an exhausted, hungry, overtaxed French population and exploded into revolution. The French Revolution began with bread. By 1789, ordinary Parisian workers were spending 80% of their income just to eat. On July 14th, they stormed the Bastille. The Declaration of the Rights of Man followed weeks later. Liberty, equality, the sovereignty of the people. But revolution, once unleashed, has its own terrifying momentum. The Reign of Terror guillotined 17,000 people in less than 2 years, including the king and queen. When it finally burned itself out, France was exhausted and desperate for order. Into that need walked Napoleon Bonaparte. 2 world wars nearly destroyed France entirely. In the First World War, France lost 1.4 million soldiers killed and 4.2 million wounded. The psychological wound shaped everything that came after. In 1940, Germany bypassed the Maginot Line and conquered France in 6 weeks. The Vichy regime collaborated, but de Gaulle broadcast from London. The resistance fought in the shadows, and when liberation came in August 1944, French forces entered Paris first. France emerged from the Second World War diminished but determined, and the empire began to fall apart almost immediately. In Indochina, the Viet Minh refused to accept a return to colonial rule. 8 years of war culminated in the catastrophic French defeat at Dien Bien Phu in 1954. The entire world understood what it meant. European colonial power in Asia was finished. Algeria was worse. 8 years of war that divided France against itself. Systematic torture carried out by French soldiers in the Kasbah of Algiers. A near military coup against the French government. And in 1962, after all of it, independence. More than 1 million European settlers fled in months. The Algerians who had fought for France were largely abandoned. Tens of thousands were killed. It was one of the most morally compromised chapters in French history. Sub-Saharan Africa decolonized faster and with less bloodshed. By 1960, 14 former French colonies achieved independence, but France never truly left. The system of France-Afrique, economic ties, military agreements, political influence, preserved French interests across Africa long after the flags changed. The CFA franc kept French monetary influence at the heart of West and Central African economies for decades. It was not colonialism in the formal sense, but it was not clean.
The truest measure of the French Empire's contradictions is Haiti. In 1791, the enslaved people of Saint-Domingue launched the largest successful slave revolt in history. They defeated France, Britain, and Spain. They declared independence on January 1, 1804, creating the first Black Republic in the world. France's response was to demand reparations. 150 million francs in compensation for the loss of the colonists' property, including the enslaved people themselves. Haiti, blockaded by French warships, had no choice but to agree. The debt was not fully paid until 1947. For over a century, the first free Black Republic in history paid its former colonizer for the audacity of its own freedom. That is the French Empire, magnificent and monstrous. The nation of liberty, equality, fraternity, that also restored slavery for profit, tortured prisoners in Algeria, and made Haiti pay for its own liberation. A civilization that produced some of humanity's greatest ideas and some of its most appalling crimes. The sun has set on the formal empire, but its consequences have not ended. They are still being felt in the streets of Paris, in the economies of West Africa, in the poverty of Haiti, and in the conversations a world still learning to reckon with its history has not yet finished having.